Announcements for you guys. Awesome. Before we get started, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our meeting planning and management webinar or presentation this afternoon with Alison Zarr of Bismarck State College. This webinar or this meeting is hosted by Prairie Communicators, which is the North Dakota Professional Communicators Southwest District based in Bismarck. My name is not a host account. My name is Sarah Mutter. I'm the district chair for the Prairie Communicators. And I've got a couple tips for you guys before we get started. Some of you, I'm sure, have used Zoom plenty of times, and for some of you, this probably isn't what you're used to. So to let you know that we do have the attendees. I've had you guys all enter in listen only mode. So if you have comments, you're welcome to enter them into the chat. There's also, I believe, an option for you to raise your hand, in which case I can actually go and unmute you. So if you've got something lengthy you want to try to talk to Alison about later and it's too much to enter into the chat, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you so that you are allowed to speak. So down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen should be some mute and stop video controls, and I believe they may be disabled for you. Those are set on here for Alison and I'm gonna probably mute myself once we get going because I have contractors in my house, of course, today when I'm trying to host this, and I don't think you guys are probably going to hear them, but they said want to avoid that distraction. But again, if you want to make comments, please use the chat or raise your hand, and you should find those functions in the lower center portion of your screen. If they're not visible right now, roll your mouse over that portion of your screen and they should pop up. Let's see. Our presenter today is Alison Zarr. Alison is a program manager with Bismarck State College's Continuing Education and Train North Dakota programs. In addition to overseeing the college's enrichment and certified nursing assistant programs, Alison also plans, manages, and promotes large events for the college, including the Energy Generation Conference, which had almost 2,000 participants last year. Today, she is going to talk about the event planning process, and she'll share a little bit about the impact that COVID-19 has had on some of the events she oversees. Before I turn things over to Alison, I just wanted to let you know that today's presentation is being recorded. So if all goes as planned, this will eventually be available on NDPC's website, so you can refer to it later, or so that any of our members who missed today's presentation are able to view it on demand. So Alison, you ready to go?
Yeah. Can you?
Yep, we can. Nope. Now you got muted yourself again. There
Okay.
you go.
Sometimes technology is a little bit too much, but hi everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Before I get started, I just thought maybe I would tell you a little bit more about myself as well as continuing education. Because before I came to continuing education, I honestly did not have any experience with conference planning. It seems to be one of those things that you kind of fall into, not something that you necessarily train for. I guess you can say my background is actually in history, but I have been working at Bismarck State College. It'll actually be 13 years this next weekend. I started back in 2007. At that time, I was strictly working with conferences. I was a conference associate, and I did that alone for the first 5 years, just as a coordinator. Main tasks would be working with speakers, and the word that we always have to use in conference planning is what are the logistics. So we did all of the things to get those speakers ready, and I apologize in advance if I use that word a lot, but the logistics as far as what do they need, what AV do they need, what do we have their bio, do we have their presentation description, do we know if they'd have any handouts, all of those kind of details. So that's all that I did at that time. In the first 5 years, I would say we averaged between 8 to 10 conferences a year, between 1 to 2 a month during the summer. Of course, our energy conference, which has usually around 2,400 people in attendance, and then everything below that from 100 to 400 people. So it's been all over the place. But so the first slide that I have here, just a little bit more about continuing education. Conferences kind of tend to come in waves throughout the years. So the amount of events that we have coordinated, they started to really go down after 2012. And that's when I took on some duties related to our enrichment program, or our adult fun classes that we like to say. And again, working with some of the same things, our instructors, scheduling classes, making sure that they have the AV that they need, making sure that they know how to work the equipments that we have in the room. And then with that program, this right here is our current catalog cover. We usually have around 200 class start dates a year, or 200 individual classes. And then among those classes, they can have either anywhere from 1 session to up to 12 sessions. So it is a pretty robust program as well. And then as Zarr also mentioned, Train and D Southwest, we're part of that. That's really kind of on the, I'm going to call it the other side of the house. We have 2 managers in our department that handle just that, contract training, professional development, and that type of thing. But continuing education between enrichment and conferences, which we refer to as open enrollment, and then our contract training, we've been around. We started close to 40 years ago. Our first conference that we did was the Energy Generation Conference, which was first established in 1978. We were brought on board in 1980 to coordinate the details for that event. And then now this year, that conference is moving into its 42nd annual show in 2001. And it's the largest that we coordinate on a regular basis. We had roughly 2,100 participants in 2020, and our peak was in 2017 when we had roughly 2,700 people at that show. It's of course held at the Bismarck Event Center. And for something that large, it's been very fine-tuned, very refined, and it's a great shell to take pieces of and use to build other events. And since I started managing that conference, I've tried to pull in more and more technology, which is a trend that, especially with COVID, that I can see us moving towards more so in the future. But some of that technology includes using an app for participants so that they can mark their schedules ahead of time, they can check into sessions, they can chat, they can share pictures. And then also we put QR codes on the participant name badges. The reason for that is because students, because we're part of the university system, when they register in our software, they're considered students, and we legally cannot share their contact information due to FERPA. So by having the QR codes on their name tag, they can go up to a vendor and say, here's my contact info, I want you to have it. And so that's how they can communicate back and forth. It's a way that they can connect as well. So, and I have a sample of that and how we have that on our name badges in a couple of them. Although we have, I think I skipped a slide. Although we've coordinated EGC for a really long time, and I'll probably continue to call it EGC throughout this presentation, but it's now actually EPIC. It's the Energy Progress and Innovation Conference. And we changed the name of that and are trying to change the focus of it just due to the changing energy industry in North Dakota and in the Midwest region. You know, it's been power generation, it's been coal, it's been the facilities, the refineries, since it's first initiated. That's the reason why it started. And so now to try and incorporate hydro, to incorporate even more refining, wind, solar, it's just a direction that we need to go, especially with how things are looking with the generation facilities in the next couple of years. And then I have a couple of the logos from the conference since I started to where we're at now. Now, as far as BSc or continuing education CE, I'll probably refer to, when I say we, I'm just referring to our department. We are generally hired to start conferences as well as work with conferences here at the college. So we do a lot of startup colleges, or conferences, excuse me. Some of them are one-time events. Some of them are events with the university system that don't require registration fees. But there are quite a few where we do need to start with the bare bones of it. They hire us to come in, mostly because, you know, continuing education, we qualify for North Dakota state rates on reservations. We can offer tax exemption at certain places, which will save money. We have a full-time accountant. And then if any of you are familiar with BSC's campus, I do have a picture of the Bavendick stateroom over on that slide right there. That's a huge draw, especially before COVID. Outside entities can only book that facility for a year out, but as a BSC department, I can book it 2 years in advance, as well as the other rooms on that floor. So I can, you know, make sure that space is reserved. Set up in rounds, it can accommodate 350 people. With chairs only, it's closer to 600 or 700. The image that you see on this screen right here is actually from our CyberCon conference last year, and that is an event. We just finished up year 3. And so that one's been held up on 4th floor up there too. So, but enough about that. Moving on a little bit to just talking about conference planning itself. Before you get started, if you're looking at planning a conference, just pretty much like with any event, you need to remember the basic questions. Who, what, why, when, where, and how. Knowing the answers to these questions will give you a jump start on planning, getting your details in place. There are questions that you're probably going to be asked 400 times. So why are you doing this? Who are you doing it for? Who are you working with? So they're, you know, and they really help to shape your event as well. The next one, questions to ask before you begin. The big one is why are you doing this event? Now, I did say that we do work with a lot of outside organizations on our conferences, whether it's Department of Health, Department of Public Construction. We have one coming up next summer with them. We have some internal events that we do, like energy. Whose idea was it to put the conference on? Do you have a planning team? Is it you all by yourself? At BSC, we work with several planning committees, which are made up mainly of subject matter experts. We need the committee because, you know, there's so much to do, and, you know, if we have a presentation or a conference coming up on water quality, we don't necessarily know the lingo. So these are the people that we look to get that information. And the committee is generally tasked with helping us find speakers and keynotes, recruiting sponsors, and being knowledge experts to help us out and get the event going and get everything done. The picture that I have right here, this is from our EPIC planning committee. This one's a couple years old, but that planning committee has roughly 25 to 30 members that actively sit on it, so it's a very large group. And we do actually get a lot done for that many people, but most of them are from outside organizations. BSC's energy department is represented by one faculty member, and then also by the dean of energy, and then a couple of us from continuing education. But the rest of the individuals that serve on it are, we have 5 vendor members from industry, either pumps or generator winding or valves, and then also Great River Energy, Basin Electric, Minnesota Power, the people that will be sending their participants to the show. So they will really help us with a lot of that. Of course, working with a committee, as we all know, there's always going to be a few people that are willing to help out and get things done more than others. You always need people to turn to. With conferences, it always seems like there's something last minute. You need them to help you proof the website, share on their social media sites, review program materials, connect with participants. If it's something, if you're doing an electrical pre-conference session, okay, so NFPA 70E, I have no idea what that means. Can you translate it? Is this description reading correctly? So those committee members are the ones that we turn to, especially for energy. They're a huge part of that event. So after you know who your stakeholders are, you know who's going to be helping you get this up and running, the next thing you really need to think about is your timeline, your event date. This will give you guidance on pretty much everything. It's almost as important as knowing what the conference is going to be about. Looking at your potential date, there's a few things to think about. Who is your stakeholder again? Do they want the event to be held during a certain time of year? Are they flexible with it? We try and stay away from themes with conferences just because it's really hard to, it just adds more details that might get missed later on. we do sometimes, but that's just something that's really hard to meet on. You want to keep your holidays in mind, though, of course. And then, is this a one-time event? Is a repeat event? With our energy conference, we're looking to invite the participants from the plants, from the energy facilities. So that conference is always held the last week in January. It's an absolutely horrible time of year to hold the conference because we are always having vendors that can't make it in because of weather. We had the polar vortex during the conference a couple years ago, and we have vendors in from 32, 34 different states. The folks from down south were really not impressed. I remember one vendor coming up to registration saying, "What do I do when it's 30 degrees below zero outside?" I said, "You just go down to Target and get yourself some gloves." It's something that they're not used to dealing with, but you have to kind of keep that in mind. So we hold that one in January because people don't take as many vacations, and then also because those facilities that send participants are generally not an outage or shutdown, so they don't have to worry about maintenance repairs. They usually send their extra men on crew down to the show, and so that allows us to reach that audience. If you ever do anything with teachers, of course, do it during the summer. We work with both the Lignite Energy Council and the North Dakota Petroleum Council on their teacher education seminars. They come on campus in summer because that's when teachers have time. That's when they need to get their credits in. Another one that we do is our CyberCon conference, which again was just last week. That one's held in October because October is National Cybersecurity Month. So it ties in perfect to that one. There's tons of events that do relate to it, but then sometimes if you have speakers coming in, they can go to your event and then they can go to the next event, and they just all kind of tie in a little bit better together. We're also doing a conference in September of next year, the Dakota Bison Symposium, which we're super excited about. BSC has done symposiums. I think this one is either our 5th one or our 6th one. And this one is really talking about the heritage of the bison. We know that audience that comes for that event, they're older. So we couldn't hold it in the winter because they won't be here. They won't be here in the spring and weather could be bad. We can't have it during the summer just to our own internal workload. And we're taking tours with it. So we're going to hold it in the fall when it's still fairly nice outside. It's light enough outside, and they can go and they can see some of those places in southwestern North Dakota and really tie into that extra history as well. The last question to ask is your event a one-time or is it repeat? Can you keep your event in January this year, and can you keep in January next year, or should you look at something different? So, and then lastly, I shouldn't forget, are your stakeholders that want the event to take place? What do they have in mind? Do they have something that they're trying to correspond with? So it's a lot to keep track of, but it really is helpful when you're planning everything. And then once your dates are selected, you will then just work backwards to establish the rest of your agenda. See if I can get this to open here. This is pretty much just, can you see this one okay? Can you see a table, Zarr? Okay, this one is pretty basic, and we actually take this kind of timeline and we turn it into a checklist. The things that you need to do, you need to make sure your dates are selected. And, I have some roles on here just based on the roles that we use here in our department. The committee picks the date. If they have a meeting location, they can give recommendations on all of that. I'm usually tasked with creating a website, getting the date information out. Determining event spokesperson is a big deal because you want to know who's going to answer questions, who's going to do a welcome, who's going to have information on the website, who's essentially going to be your MC. And getting that done early helps because then if you need a decision made, you can just go to that person and get that information. And then, those are the first couple of months, and then you can break it down by what you're going to do from 6 to 4 months. You really want to get that agenda finalized. You want to finalize your speakers. You want to open registration, and just different things like that as you get closer to it. Your menu, make sure your facility contracts are in place. Send your room setups to the event center, and I have another slide to kind of show you some of that information. And this is pretty much a standard timeline. You can find dozens of these if you go out and look on the internet. Eventbrite has one that I looked at when I was putting this one together. I actually have a binder sitting on my desk from like 2 managers before me from probably 20 years ago. And nothing's really changed besides adding more technology in there. The information that was there then is pretty much the same things that you need to make sure you get checked off now. So that's one thing that's nice, is once you get one down, you know how to move on to the next one. But a couple of other things you want to make sure to remember to add to your timeline and don't get missed are you want to make sure that all of these things are done. You want to make sure that you have proofing. Now this one right here is the cover of our Save the Date postcard for our energy conference in 2021, which has changed. It's no longer at the event center. It's no longer the 26th or the 28th, because as of the end of September, we have decided to go virtual with that show as well, just because the plants will not send their essential employees into a situation where they could put themselves in danger, which makes perfect sense. But now it's finding value for the vendors into, yeah, there's still a lot to work through with all of those changes though too. But a couple of other things with the Save the Date postcard is when you're building your timeline, a postcard like this is actually an 8.5 by 11 folded. That'll probably take you a week to proof, maybe, depending on who has to look at it, who is doing the graphic art, who needs to approve of it. A registration brochure is going to take you 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the content, because usually you need speaker bios, you need some pictures, you need descriptions, you need a rough agenda, and that goes through the whole, you know, we have an operations manager who's excellent at proofing, so I make sure to send it to her. I have to send it up to the energy department for approval. I need to get the changes back to the artist, so make sure to include enough time for proofing. I also have speaker contracts on here because if they're receiving any kind of pay, you're going to want to have something in place. Most speakers outside of state government, okay, maybe 50% outside of state government, do require some kind of reimbursement, and you'll want to make sure that you have paperwork in place so that you can get them the funds that they need. If they're not getting a fee, travel reimbursement is pretty common, mileage on personal cars, lodging, and meals. And also Bismarck State College does qualify for North Dakota state rates. So that's what we tell those people coming into, this is the rate that you're going to get reimbursed at. We have switched to kind of because there's a lot of extra paperwork, you need the receipts and you need the travel reimbursement form and you need to do RFPs. We have switched to doing a flat rate for speakers. If we can estimate how much their mileage and meals and lodging is going to be, say it's going to be $250, we'll say, can I just pay you $300 and we won't worry about the paperwork? And then they take care of all the expenses. And that, even with keynote speakers at the national level, has worked really, really well. And it's a lot less work when there's so many other things going on. Speaker bios and photos for the website, of course, are important. I think I have that one. Couple of examples right here, or the conference app. We don't generally put them in registration materials, excuse me, but it's great information to keep on the website. The top one is our keynote for energy for 2021, and then Sean Riley did the welcome for CyberCon on the second day last week. Hang on just a second. Also, on that, going back to details that you need to keep in mind, is you want to make sure that you have everything for those speakers. You need to know their AV. Do they need a projector? Do they need a screen? What time are they presenting? What room are they presenting? So this right here is actually part of a larger spreadsheet that we put together and actually send down for energy to the event center, just so that we know, okay, so Prairie, Exhibit Hall Room 101, those are also the Prairie Rose rooms. Those top 4 have projectors built into the room, so we list it on here so that they know that we're going to be using our equipment. And then also that makes us say, okay, so we have 6 projectors in-house. We need to borrow a projector from, if Coal Creek has one available, we need to borrow one from the energy department upstairs. And so that helps us tabulate all of that equipment that we need as well. And then this document right here, the screen clip that I have, is we always send a final details to our speakers about 2 weeks before the conference, just reminding them, hey, you're presenting in 2 weeks down here in Bismarck. You know, we include the session title, That's another one of those sessions, boiler efficiency through steam compensated level control, where I need those committee members to tell me if the information that we have is correct or something's missing, the dates that they're presenting, the times, the room that they're going to be in, and if they requested any handouts. Here in Bismarck, of course, it's super nice. If they request handouts, I just send them down to flash printing. We generally estimate the number of copies that we need based on the room capacity. So the Murdoch room, set classroom style with tables and chairs, can accommodate up to 30. So we'll tell Flash to make 30 copies. If they run out, we'll just take their name at registration and send them the PDF after the show. So, and they're of course getting away from more and more of those handouts, but it's just one of those things that you need to remember. We had 2 speakers at CyberCon last week. We actually just attached a PDF to the agenda because everything was virtual, and that seemed to work out pretty well as well. The other thing is facility agreements. You need to make sure that you have all of your contracts in place. We always have to send everything by legal if it's something that we haven't done before, just to make sure that everything is in compliance. I usually request an empty map of the facility that we're using so that I can do a setup map like this one right here. And this one is not complex at all. This is a map of the energy building. I used a screen snip, pulled it into Microsoft Paint, and added the boxes and the text box and all of the colors in Microsoft Paint, which is, you know, one of those programs that's been around since I started using a computer in the 90s. You can definitely go higher quality with it, but for our facility staff here at BSC, they love having the maps, and it doesn't need to get anymore. I just save it as a PDF, send it back to them, and then we can set up all of the details based on that information. So anyway, so that's just one of the tools that we use. And then just a couple extra pictures that I threw on here from our energy conference. The top left picture is we have achievement award winners every year. They can submit an application and they receive $1,000. They have to be current BSc students. And then after they graduate and submit their certificate, they actually get cash, $1,000 cash as their achievement award. And that's all voted on by the committee. BSc doesn't have to do anything with that. So those selections are made by industry staff. The top right picture is a screenshot of our exhibit hall. I think this was in 2019. We generally have between 300 to 325 booths at the show. Companies can buy up to 4 of them. So we usually have, I think last year we had something like 265 companies that came in. Directly below that is a map of what that show hall looks like, the little blue dots. And it's kind of funny because the event center, if you put a blue dot right there representing a table for participants, that is where the event center is going to put your table. So that you always tell them to be to add more if there's more room, or to be flexible. This is, of course, the back wall. We open up the air wall and you can see that right here too, just because we do fill the whole thing. And then the last picture I have over here on the lower left is that's just, we have the Energy Club help us with registration on site, and we direct participants. We have speaker boxes where we have the name tags, and they just go to where their last name is, and that's how we pull their name tag on there too. So. The next slide I have right here, pretty standard, just a couple samples of conference agendas. Schedule number 1 is just a one-day event, and there's so many different things you can do with agendas. This one, if you're starting right away in the morning, you're going to want your keynote. Make sure that there are health breaks. People can go and use the restroom, get a drink of water. Make sure to schedule those when you're putting agenda together. Plug in your breakout sessions, how many rooms you have. You have 2 rooms. I would list one on top of the other so that they can pick which one they want to go to. But this will give you, after you have, this is really the first part that you want to do to know how many speakers that you need to go with. So after you have this figured out, say you have 4 opportunities for breakout sessions, there's 2 each. That's 8 potential presentations unless you repeat them. At Energy on Wednesday and Thursday, the schedule's the same. We have a keynote in the morning and then we roll to breakout sessions. If Tony presented on Wednesday, he'll present at the same time on Thursday, because when the plants send people down, they'll send crew A one day, they'll send crew B the second day. unless they're an engineer, and then that way they can see the same sessions, they can see the same presentations, they can see the vendors. So that's just one way that that one's set up. And then the second schedule I have is designed as a day-and-a-half conference. Everything's in one room. You have some panels, then you have a single presentation. Make sure to put time in there for a welcome. Of course, at BSC, we try and incorporate the president wherever possible. A morning keynotes, make sure to put a networking lunch in there. If you're doing anything for teachers who need credit hours, a networking lunch, a networking breakfast are great opportunities to build in that extra time so that they can meet the hours that they need for their training. Excuse me, to talk a little bit about the budget. Before you even try and generate the amount of income that you need, first take a look at what money are you putting out. This slide right here, it just shows some of the expenses that we generally have for an event. When we put our budget together, these are our main categories. I have food on there first. You know, I'm sure you've all seen a sample menu from a venue. The one thing to keep in mind is that whatever your base cost is, if it's $12.50 for a participant or $12.75, if you want to add soup, it's an additional $2. And then don't forget, you also need to make sure to include in your budget that 18% service charge, and if there's any tax. Now, I don't have to pay the tax coming from Bismarck State College, but I do still have to pay the service fee. So I'll have to go back and make sure that's included on my budget so that we're not short at the end. The next is miscellaneous supplies, and that can be a little bit of everything. I have a picture there of some of our name badges that we do for energy. This was a couple years ago where there was still the plastic with the stuff, which of course is the most financially easy, not financially easy, the lowest cost option probably. And then you need to make sure that you have your lanyards in there, clips, any attendee swag, if they're gonna get pens, if they're gonna get bags. And then even before, we always made sure that we had hand sanitizer and Kleenexes at the registration desk. Of course, then we were, you know, making sure, especially in January, it's flu season, so make sure you have all of that taking place. Miscellaneous expenses for energy. We also have a standing line item for rubber chickens. It's how the committee gets participants attention during lunch, and then they actually give the chicken away with a gift card at casino night. So I remember asking my financial person one day, I'm like, so rubber chickens, is that a miscellaneous expense or office supply? So that's something that we always have to put on there too, but something that we kind of laugh about. And then one other thing that I recommend is don't use cardboard boxes. A couple years ago for energy, we were setting up, we come in on Monday to set everything up. Our energy club puts all of the packets on the tables in the exhibit hall while we're doing other stuff. And they came up and they said that we're missing 36 booth packets. We couldn't find the boxes. They had the name tags, they had the lanyards, they had program books, they had everything in them. So then on Tuesday, we spent the entire day recreating all of those packets because our vendors were checking in. That's, you know, roughly 30 different companies. We were packing up on Thursday and we found them at the end of the conference in cardboard boxes, marked lanyards stacked underneath something in the back room. So now we put literally everything in clear plastic totes. I think I have a picture of it here too. Over here, you can see the clear plastic totes, and I'll tell you what, they're a lifesaver. You can see exactly where everything is at. I'll never go back to using cardboard boxes as much as unless it's shipped in something. In this picture, you can see after energy last year, we had koozies, so that's what's in these two boxes. We had, of course, our printing, but other than that, we have bags and boxes for everything that we use. We like to use toolboxes a lot. We have one for our pens and our markers, and you know, if we're doing a one-time event, a short event, we know we have to grab the pink one, and that has all of our basics, has our stapler, it has our tape, it has everything to take with us. When we go to energy, I'm sure one of these is actually for casino night where they keep all of their decks of cards and pens and tickets in that. And then one will have dry erase markers in it, one will have tape in it, one will have just pretty much everything. We just grab them, they're in there all the time, and we just head out the door with them. So I definitely recommend toolboxes. And then of course we have a couple of portable printers that we take with us every year as well. So just some of those miscellaneous supplies that you might not think about. Going back quick, postage, make sure you include postage. The company or organization that we're part of says don't kill the registration brochure, and I'm a firm believer. You can stick that registration brochure, that save the date, on your bulletin board, and it's there. They can delete a save the date email and say, oh, I never got that. So to have something physical, it's a cost, but it's a cost that it's really hard to convince me not to do anything like that. So printing and promotion, what we would put underneath there, your sponsor signage, your registration mailers, your save the date cards, obviously things that you know you need. Rentals, equipment rooms, that's if you need to rent any AV equipment, your facility rental for the Bismarck Event Center. If you're paying any facility rental at the Ramcota, you just need to make sure you have a place for that. Communications, of course, phone, fax, website redirect, so that you can have custom URL. Although fax is pretty much nothing these days, you need to make sure you have a phone charge on there because, you know, we'll get that from the college. And then operating fees and services, things that we would put underneath there are service awards for our speakers, speaker thank you gifts, any trademark fees if we have any, door prizes, and then also if you're paying for your event by credit card or your participants are, there's going to be that 3% charge that has to go back to those credit card companies, and so we put that under operating fees and services. The last one is professional fees and services, and that can be your speaker fees, your travel reimbursement, your keynote payment, or we call it an honorarium. Your photographer, if you're hiring a photographer, if you have any staging fees, and then also if continuing ed is being hired, we put our coordination fee under that one as well. Going back to this slide right here, here's just some miscellaneous expenses. These are some challenge coins. We've been doing challenge coins for cyber for the last couple of years. We're going to mail these out to participants with a thank you card, save the date for 2021. And so these are the coins we did this year. The mug that you see over here on the right, those were handmade by a gal in Michigan specifically for our speakers. I found her on Etsy. I ordered them in May, and it took her approximately 7 months because she had to make 80 of them. They were for the committee. They were for our speakers. They were for, you know, anybody else. It's just a small thank you, something that we can give. And I know sometimes there's restrictions. Conference funding is considered non-appropriated, so it's not state funding. It's from outside sources. And so that's the reason that we can do some of those things. And then lastly, this is just a PDF sample of a name tag that we would do. Poor Dave, since his last name starts with an A, he's like always my sample. He's always the first person that I pull into everything. But those were his booths for that particular year. And so that's just a sample. And then if you flip it to the reverse, we usually do a save the date. And then we also have our major sponsor logos on there as well. This one also has room for 2 slots so that when you use a lanyard, the lanyard doesn't flip around, and that's something that actually our vendors requested. So that's something that's specific to that event, but when we're ordering 3,000 of them, we generally use them for whatever other events that we have coming up as well. Now, as far as budgeting for revenue, it's easier to do once you have all of your expenses in place. Pick a registration fee. I don't like free events, although they're nice to send people to. I guess, you know, the saying is they don't have any skin in the game. They don't have a registration fee. I don't feel like going today, so I'm not going to worry about going. And then instead of having 30 people that you ordered food for, nobody shows up. So even if it's $15, I recommend having something in there. This is just kind of the template that we use when we calculate our expenses. And I should say, I think the numbers are right. I do have to say I went into history and not math. So it's not always my strongest point, but you know, this is what we budgeted in the first column. That's what we wanted to bring in to cover our expenses, actual expenses based on real-time registration. And then that way you can calculate. We put all of the expenses below this, and that's how you can calculate what you have going on. I do also have a screenshot over here showing registration. This is from our energy brochure. It's only $50 a day, so it really is a steal for participants. Have a cancellation policy. If you're going to make people pay, they're going to keep canceling unless you have some kind of a policy in place. And so ours is that they need to let us know 2 weeks out before the show. Or they can transfer. If I can't make it, I work with Sarah. Sarah can make it. We'll do a transfer within our system. So that's something to keep in mind too. One thing that Sarah mentioned too was registration software. I know that a lot of companies around the area generally use Eventbrite, or they use Cvent is another one that's really popular. Bismarck's financial department will not let us use Eventbrite. They don't like how the money comes from their account, from the participant to their account, and then back to our account. There's some major red flags, so we can't use that one for anything. Then there's Cvent, which is a good software for events. But because we have to run all of our enrichment and professional development and conferences at the same time, and there's only 11 of us in our department, we all use the same software. So the software that we use is actually called, it's called Lumens, and it's by a company called AuguSoft. It's designed for continuing education. It's designed for open enrollment, and we make it work for conferences. So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. I do have a couple of screenshots up here as well. Survey software is probably going to be your best friend if you're planning an event, because you can get a free account. I use it for everything. I use it for mailing lists. I use it for the top picture on the left is a screenshot of our evaluation after CyberCon last week. I use it to call for presenters. I used it for sponsorship commitment. Then we pull that and we turn it into an invoice and send it to them. They can upload their logos in there if they want to. I used to use SurveyMonkey, but then the university system moved to Qualtrics. And then due to cost, we switched to Question Pro in January. I can honestly say they're all about the same. But it's just a great tool that's generally free. We use it for free events to collect registrations too. If it's an event that is only going to happen once and you don't want to charge a fee, use a survey software. We use Lumens because if an event is reoccurring, we can create a transcript out of it. And we can track if they came in 2017, 2016, and we've now been in the software since 2014. So we do have some history with that one as well. I should go back to your budget page to talk just a little bit about sponsors. Sponsors are really going to probably make up 50% of your income for a conference, unless you have a high registration fee, and who really wants to have a high registration fee for participants? In fact, CyberCon this year was $75, and most virtual events have been free, so we did get a lot of complaints about that as a fee, even though normally that conference would cost $175. So you're going to want to look for your sponsors. That's one thing that's nice about committee members. If they work for a company, you can see a screenshot right here from CyberCon last week. Basin Electric, Dakota Carrier Network, Doosan, they all sit on that planning committee. They all participate in the meetings, and so they are responsible for going to their companies and help us solicit those sponsors to support that event. The image on the right hand of the screen is for that Dakota Bison Symposium that we're doing next year. Just a sample, pretty standard. You are obviously going to get more benefits for your higher level than you are going to get for your lower level. How many seats are they going to get to the show? Are you going to put their logo or their company name on the website? Just some of those things. You just want to make sure that it's enough worth for that company that they want to invest in whatever event that you're doing, and that it can help balance your budget too. The last thing that Sarah mentioned was, what do we do with COVID and how do we see it changing us in the future? And there's really two main things. You need to be flexible, and it's really hard for me, but you need to be okay with Plan B. For CyberCon, which is our first virtual conference, we changed it to virtual 2 months ago. We then had to switch the event production company due to quarantine 1 week before the event. We then had to switch production locations 4 days before the event, and then on the second day of the conference, our closing keynote speaker almost had to back out because she got pulled into a meeting. We would have never predicted any of those things 4 months ago, but in my opinion, I don't like canceling. I'd rather move forward than have to cancel. And again, I say be okay with Plan B, because it's so hard to shift your mentality especially after you put so much time and effort into an event to replan, rethink, and find the new right solution. The second change, major change I'm going to say that we're already seeing is that there's going to be more technology involved with conferences moving forward. There's going to be more virtual. For our events, I'm going to try and figure out a system for contactless check-in where participants get their QR code, they scan it, print their name badge, check themselves in, and away they go. So, and we've talked with a couple of companies, we're just not quite there yet. It would also save our team time because they don't have to stuff badges anymore. Again, also more virtual events. Right now we rely on BSC's instructional technology team. They're also part of college relations and creating promotions for the conference, so they just don't necessarily have the time for it. So we need to figure out how we can do those more so on our own as well. But those are the two main things. And now I know that was a lot of information to take in, but I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Sarah, I'll try and figure out if I can pull up the chat over here, but if you can see anything before I get there, please let me know.
We do have one question, Allison, from Becky Cook. And if anyone else has questions, go ahead and you can either raise your hand and like I said, I can unmute you or you can enter them in the chat now. But Becky was asking about apps and she said, do you create your own app or use something like, I think it's, Sketch. That's short for schedule.
We have been using Guidebook we've used it for energy and then we've also used it for CyberCon because they actually have a really low rate to get started. As long as you're happy or as long as you're fine working without a lot of technical assistance, their fee is you get 5 users for free and then it's $5 a person. And then after that, as long as the app is active, it's only $5 a month. So you really can't. It used to be a $2,500 investment, and then they changed that. And like with energy, although we have over 2,000 people, I've never had more than 500 people download the app. And so the cost difference with Guidebook is just, you almost can't beat it. There are some limitations to that one. The QR scanning on name badges is one thing I know our vendors want. There's not a place in Guidebook to maintain that data. So they would still have to look for a separate app to scan and collect participant data. But other than that, Guidebook has worked fantastic for us. And in our office, it's usually just me and our program coordinator who work with the details. I usually handle any of the contracts and facility and agendas and printing, and she does most everything with the speakers. So she collects their bios and their photos, and between the two of us, we're the ones that build that app right here in the office. So Guidebook is, I would have to say, it's very user friendly.
I am a little bit familiar with Guidebook as well. I know the League of Cities, I believe, has used it for their events. We actually, at the Housing Finance Agency, we don't do events quite as big as Alison, but we do have a CVent contract and we use Crowd Compass. And the one advantage of using Crowd Compass and CVent versus what Alison's situation is we can create everything in CVent and it automatically transfers over to Crowd Compass. And I know by using Guidebook or something that's not integrated, you're going to end up having to recreate your content.
Entry. Yep.
Yeah. And so every time you make a change over here, you got to make sure you make it over there. And so that's something, depending on your event, it's something to keep in mind.
Well, and again, we've looked at CVent, but because our primary conference, it wouldn't really work for our other non-credit programs that we have. And it doesn't work for energy because although they do have booth selection, it's cumbersome to try and select, most of our vendors, we usually sell around 175 booths in the first day. We used to sell out the entire show hall in 10 minutes. And for them to try and select their booth and scroll down and find the one that they want just wouldn't work for that event. So if we are looking at potentially moving our conferences to different software, but that would be the #1 key because that one has been around for so long and is the biggest, that's the one that would have to accommodate before anything else. So I know Safety Council uses CVent as well. I know I'd love something like that, but it's a little harder when you have to do the one size fits all.
Yeah, C-Vent is also expensive. I will tell you that as well.
I think they all are.
They all are, but you can't.
Either.
I don't think you
Right.
can even do like a free trial with C-Vent. You have to have an entry-level contract to work with them.
Yeah,
versus,
which is
versus I was going to say like Eventbrite. I believe you can still get in on doing some stuff with Eventbrite to get started for free.
You can also look at, again, doing the question pro registration. After they are the survey software, they can set up the registration. You can pull their data. You can send them an invoice if that's what you want to do. Lumens also allows us to do bulk registration. So say Basin's coming in and they have to register 125 people. They can go in and they can select 10 people, say they want to register for Wednesday, and that's done in one transaction, which is, we need it for, that's huge for that event. And so that's one thing that's really worked well for us in that particular situation too. And then also because we do have to handle refunds, we have to tie into TouchNet, and Lumens does that for us as well. So that's been, although I've heard grumblings that some of that is changing. So we'll see what the next year brings too.
All right. Does anyone else have questions for Alison? Like I said, you can go ahead and enter them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Okay, we're getting up to the 1 o'clock top of the hour. So like I said, go ahead and enter them. I've got just a couple reminders for you guys before I let you go. First of all, of course, I want to thank Alison for sharing with us today. We appreciate that. And thank everyone for participating. We did have a district director meeting this morning and just want to remind our NDPC members that are here that keep watching the listserv for information on upcoming meetings. I know the Minot area professional communicators are working on, I believe, an October 21st presentation on COVID-19's impact on political and marketing campaigns, and October 26th, Valley Marcon, which is the Grand Forks District, is having Lieutenant Derek Zimmel lead a discussion on their police department's crisis communications experiences over the past year. And I know there's a lot more in the works as well. So, and actually I should add to our chapter or our district, on December 9th, I get a quick look at my calendar, we're going to have Jason Matthews talk about grassroots communications. And so he said a lot more in the works. So keep an eye on your listserv messaging to make sure you're getting that information, and district directors should be forwarding information to you as well. And I don't see any more questions, so we'll wrap up. And again, thank you everyone for participating today, and thank you, Alison. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.